Yes, hello again. Welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, where we continue to do our very best to bring you more of those old school classics from a way back in the day. Now, just before we get down to our next featured machine, a quick hello to one of my subscribers, and a big hello there to Henry in Belgium, who is my #1 fan here on CDB TV. And Henry is always the first to put a comment on my video posting. So hello to you, Henry, over there in sunny Belgium. So right now, let's get down to our next featured machine. Now, this is a bike I came across quite recently, so we're going to take a quick look at this bike right now. So let's get down to business and take a look at Lewis Hart's lovely 1980 RM250 Suzuki. Right, okay, so this is just another short video in between preparing for my next feature, which will be coming up very shortly. But as I mentioned, this very nice 1980 RM250 Suzuki is Lewis Hart's race bike, and these short clips here were taken as Lewis was preparing to start his first race of the season at a Scottish Twinshock race event that was being held at Drumclog in Ayrshire. So, as you can see from these pictures, Lewis has been very busy through the winter period getting the bike all ready, and it's shining like a brand new pin here in these pictures, all prepped for its first race of the year. Now, as you remember, these 1980 RM250s were the last of the Twinshock Suzuki Motocrossers, as Suzuki then turned to the more modern style single shock rear suspension systems in 1981, and they also upgraded their very successful air-cooled two-stroke engine to liquid cooling as well. But without doubt, this is still a fine example of the 80 RM, although I'm sure that these 1980s still had the black tubular steel chassis and not this blue colour that Lewis has on his bike. But the rear swing arm is certainly correct, with it being a simple box type alloy construction. So the engines that powered these RM250s was a two-stroke single that I think, if my memory serves me correctly, had a bore of around 67 millimetres and I think it was a stroke of about 70 millimetres, which I think gave it a displacement of about 246 cc's. Now, to fuel this engine, it was normally a 36 millimetre Mikuni that would feed the oil and air mixture into the cylinder, and inside the plastic airbox it was a washable foam type air filter, and as I remember, the ignition end, it was an electronic CDI system that supplied the sparks to ignite that fuel air mixture. And on the transmission side of the engine, it was usually a 5-speed gearbox. But it's no surprise to me, after 44 years of use on the track, that Lewis's Suzuki now has a new exhaust expansion chamber to replace what would have been the Suzuki original. And this PFR pipe, or Pro Form Racing, is a straight forward bolt-on replacement pipe to the Suzuki original, and also at the back of this bike, it's another quite nice alloy replacement to what would have been the stock 1980 pipe. So as we move around to the front end of Lewis's 250, and again, I'm sure it was a pair of, I think it was 38 millimetre Kayabas that Suzuki bolted onto the front of these 80 RM250s, which, as I recall, I think gave the rider just over that 11 inches of movement here at the front. And the stopping power for the RM was supplied by these quite sizable old school drum brakes and hubs. And from what I remember, these old school drum and shoe type affairs on this twin shocker certainly did a decent job of slowing and eventually stopping our RM when it was in full flight. And here at the back, if you were lucky enough to buy one of these RM250s in 1980, then it more than likely would have come with a pair of pretty basic Kayaba rear shocks, although you can see here that Lewis has swapped those for what looks like a decent pair of Works Performance suspension units, which certainly complement the Suzuki's excellent rear alloy swing arm and rear hub assembly. And you may have already noticed that the wheels on our Lewis Hart racer are, of course, the stock original 1980 polished alloy rims that would have been put on this bike in that year, but these gold alloy rims certainly complement the yellow theme of this RM250. And also by 1980, Suzuki were already moving away from steel or alloy fuel tanks, and plastic was going to be the new material for almost all of their future motocross models. And this tank here, I think, held just over the 2 gallons of pre-mixed fuel, so it had more than enough capacity to do even the longest of motocross races. And you can also see that after more than 44 years of use, all of the original controls on this bike are now long gone, and it's much more modern parts that are being substituted in their place with modern style rental bars and different grips. And I can also see that an engine kill switch is also being added just in case an emergency shutdown is required on that 250 Suzuki motor. But despite Lewis's bike not being a fully original example from 1980, you can see that it's still quite a nice looking piece of kit, but more importantly, it's still being used as a weekend racer, and it's not every day that you come across one of these older RM250s. It's still competing on the racetrack. And as I mentioned earlier, you can see that Lewis has been out with the spit and polish through the winter shutdown, getting his RM race ready for the start of a brand new racing season. And these short clips here were taken just minutes before Lewis put his bike onto the racetrack for the very first race event of the year. And you can see that the bike was looking absolutely fantastic sitting here in the early morning Scottish sunshine. But I do suppose it's quite fair to say that Lewis is a bit of a fan of these RMs, because not only does he have one 250, he also has another almost identical machine, albeit the other bike has some slightly different parts bolted onto it. But both bikes, without doubt, certainly make a fantastic looking spectacle. And this example here, front and centre, is a much more accurate representation of what one of these early 1980 RM250s should look like. And again, both of these bikes are raced on a regular basis, so well done again to Lewis for flying the flag for these older twin-shock RM Suzukis. Because as I mentioned previously, you certainly don't see very many of these twin-shock RMs still racing, and often if somebody does have a quite good original example, then it's usually just kept as a show bike and not a track racer. But for me, this is where these old classics belong, out there on the racetrack where everybody can see and listen to them running. And even although these pair here don't have all of the factory parts that they were given in 1980, there's still a couple of superb RM Twinshockers, because personally speaking, in the past I've seen both of these bikes in action on the track, and for a smaller 250 two-stroke, these bikes were still pretty quick for an old school twin-shocker, which of course riders who raced these bikes in the early 1980s will certainly testify. And in this nice picture here, this is a shot of Lewis putting our first featured bike through its paces while he was racing at a Scottish twin-shock race event at Pow Mill some time ago. But without question, these RM250s were certainly very popular back in 1980, and overall they did have a decent chassis and quite good suspension on the front and at the rear, and of course they also had that excellent 250 Suzuki two-stroke motor. But naturally they also had their little idiosyncrasies or little niggles that every single motocross racer had, but essentially they were a very good bike, and this pair here belonging to Lewis Hart are without doubt a pair of crackers. So once more, thanks once again for watching Classic Dirt Bike TV, and look out for more long lost off-road machines coming soon to your favourite CDB TV channel.